of all, happy Friday. And happy Valentine's Day. Did anybody remember that it's actually Valentine's Day? So yesterday, we had a snowball fight, and I thought it was great, and then it actually snowed. So I don't know if we caused that or helped that along. But what I want to say is I'm glad you're here this morning, because snow in Seattle, even though you could barely see any on the ground this morning around here, meant that a lot of the schools are 2 hours late, etc. And I do notice that I think we're a little thinner than we were yesterday, so people may be trickling in. We may have a few more online. So just be aware of that when we're speaking, that we'll need to hand you a mic so that we can hear questions and answers clearly this morning, because we're all in the same room until noon today. So, over the last, I hear music. Am I being serenaded? Are we all being serenaded? Maybe we could, Michael, Michael. I love it, and I don't know if it goes with our topic, our next topic. So I hoped you enjoyed yesterday's sessions and all the breakout work that we did, and for those of you who stayed into the evening, I feel like it was a good, worthwhile good time spent. And this morning, we're going to send you off into your day with both a little inspiration and some practical information. And we're going to start out with the practical. We've talked a lot about relationships over the last couple of days, and how we view relationships and manage relationships, and really see it as a wider engagement of our community. And we talked about money, how we raise it, how we invest it, how people think about it. And with everything going on, and I would love to just kind of have hands raised of people across our state here who have hiring freezes happening. Yeah, okay. This morning on the way in, I heard a quote from Bob Ferguson talking about the concern over the fact that the state of Washington has a third of its budget covered by federal funds, and how scary that is, and how there's a 6% spending cut. I say that not all, to like doom and gloom this morning, but just to say that the work that we do as relationship builders and fundraisers is going to be even more important as we bring calm and encouragement to our community and investment in people. So, we're going to talk more about DEI this morning. Sophia Akhtarab is here. But first, as I said, we're going to go into some practical topics around finance. And as I said, our work is going to become more important, but we're also going to have to make a really strong case for ourselves, right, on the advancement and foundation work that we do. So I'm really happy this morning that some people I've worked closely with over the last few years to both start up the foundation and help our board understand our finances and be incredibly supportive of us. Today we have Nick Pennington, our Executive Director of Finance and Administration with the Seattle Colleges. He's on the advancement side and the foundation side. And also, sorry, I want to be able to talk about your backgrounds here in just a second. No, I know, Amy. Sorry. No, Amy, I know your name. I'm just looking for your background. Sorry, I'm still waking up this morning. It was a long day and night. So, Nick, I should know this, Nick. I know you just got your master's degree because you were still getting it in business when you joined this. But Amy Michael actually has quite deep experience in nonprofit, and we know her as our financial consultant and CFO consultant from CFO Solutions. But she's also been with Seattle Universities in the nonprofit management program, and is has spent 7 years. I'm looking at this and my eyes are blurry because I don't have my reading glasses on. But you've had 7 years as a CFO, and you've also earned your MBA. So you may want to share a little bit more about your background since my eyes are blurry. I am so sorry I don't have my reading glasses on. To be able to fumble through this is probably painful for all of you to watch. But in any case, why don't we just bring Nick and Amy up here and just jump right into it. Thank you.
Just make a quick point before we proceed, which is to say that the Hot Topics board is filling up, and if you have additional questions that you would like us to consider during that session, which is at the end of the day, if you can put them up soon so that we can kind of group them and begin to think about how we can approach them in the most systematic way, that would be awesome. So far, the big themes seem to be around helping college leaders think big and think optimistically, even amid trying times, relating to what Carrie was saying, really. Also, some questions about how we balance the work going after big donors, also base level small donors, corporate donors, all at the same time, kind of balance all that. And then additionally, there's a cluster of questions about how we can collectively share resources, find ways to collaborate more fully, advocate together as we navigate the twisting road ahead of us. But with that, I'm going to give it to these great finance folk.
Thanks, Michael. Hello. Did you want to make the ketchup announcement?
Yes. Ketchup is coming.
Ketchup is on its way. We're going to put our presentation up there in a second. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, cool. Today we're going to be talking about finance and accounting. It's so fun. How many of you out there would say that talking to your board and finance committee is the favorite part of your job? Just me? Come on, Nick. Well, I get that. That's a really common response. And honestly, that is why I love it, because nobody raised their hand about that. And you will maybe come to like it too. Let me tell you why. I like to think about it like this. Most people feel exactly that way about finance and accounting conversations. They come into them thinking, I'm going to be bored, I'm going to get lost in the numbers, those people are going to make me feel dumb, and I'm going to think that I missed something on my way out the door. So what's great about that is that sets the bar so low. You can almost always get over that, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is a couple of things that you can do to make that conversation a little bit more accessible, hop over that very low bar, and give people really a vastly more positive experience with those conversations. I feel, I do like simple, but I feel like I did a little more work on it than all right.
1 minute. 1 minute.
It has no numbers on it, it's true, but it does have a couple of words. Okay, cool. Well, let's keep talking. Okay, so that's the good news. We can get over this very low bar, and it's why I love teaching finance and accounting in the Master's Nonprofit Leadership Program, because those students come into that class like, this class is going to be terrible. And so I don't have to do very much to have that be one of the students' favorite classes. All right, well, let's introduce ourselves. My name's Amy. See, I had the same problem Carrie did. I'm just kidding. Yeah. My name is Amy, and this is Nick. I worked as a financial consultant, and I think what Carrie was going to say is I was the CFO at Fair Start for 7 years, so I've actually spoken from this very stage before. Sadly, they're no longer part of this building, but I was here when we started. And when I worked with Seattle Colleges Foundation, I came in to help reshape their conversation about finance and accounting with their finance committee and board. And we put in place some reports, some templates, keep that conversation going. And then Nick.
Hello, I'm Nick. I came to the Seattle Colleges Foundation via Robert Half. Amy selected me, Carrie approved. Did a bunch of forensic work, got the financials to a good place with all of the help from Amy. And then Amy moved on, and then I stayed and took a permanent role, and here we are today.
Cool, and we have our slides now. Maybe we could just advance to. Okay, well today what we're going to talk about is a couple of things, 3 things. We're going to talk about how we define our financial narrative. The story about finances gets way bigger when you look beyond the 2 or 3 critical reports that you're churning out all the time. And we're going to talk about how to flesh out that narrative. Then we're going to talk about how we go about engaging our board in the conversation in a productive way, right? Not in a way that makes us cry or not get sleep the night before or night after. And then we're going to look at some real world examples of how Seattle Colleges Foundation is using dashboards and KPIs, so a little jargon to start off the morning, in the real world to frame this conversation and keep it at the altitude they want to. KPIs is key performance indicators. Never be afraid to ask a finance person what the heck they're talking about when they use letters to talk about things, but we'll talk a little more about those in a minute. I feel like Michael's getting revenge on me for me ever making him talk about finance before. All right, so the slides are not important, so please don't be distracted by the fact that they're not there. The first thing we're going to talk about is the financial narrative. What is the financial narrative? And you guys are storytellers. There's a lot of fundraisers in this room. The financial narrative is really the financial story of your organization. And we want you to think about it as more than just those statements, that statement of financial position. Yeah! That's great. Okay, but don't get your hopes up too much. So your financial statements, it's also your budget and your forecast, and not just that piece of paper that's your budget or that one graph. It's really that whole process, how you bring people along in the big picture planning conversation. The more the merrier with stuff like that. It is also, oh cool, thanks Michael. That's the backwards one. I'm learning. There we go. See? There you go, yes! So it's also budgets and forecasts. It's also your audit, which is a really scary kind of pain in the rear process that we go through every year. Really getting people to understand what part that plays in your big financial narrative is really important and can help people be a little more team player-ish when we ask them to do the ridiculous amount of backup we have to ask for. It's also your strategic plan and your long-term goal. Your strategic plan is like that long story arc. The budget is like one part of it. But when we include the long-term goals, what we're doing in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, we can really set the altitude of the conversation with our board and finance committee much higher. It gets them out of the weeds. We tell our story in context of the big story arc. It also, for us, includes related party stuff, right? Like our financial story is wrapped very tightly with the financial story of the colleges, State of Washington, federal funding right now. And so making sure we put that in context, our stories, like our one quarterly financial report in the context of that bigger picture can help moderate the altitude of that conversation as well. And then all the people, our board, our finance committee, they are a part of our finance narrative too. And as those characters change, our narrative changes a little bit. Different board members are interested or worried about different things. So we have to be able to keep the major themes of the story going, but we've got to also be willing to moderate it a little bit for different personalities and voices that come to the table. And of course, it's bigger than just your finance person. It's your finance and your non-finance staff. So if we think about all these components and all these characters, it's like a Russian novel. There's so much to keep track of. And it is actually like a Russian novel because it's like we're reading it in Russian, because finance and accounting has this indiscernible language that's such a critical component of it, and it really can create a barrier. And it can be a big part of why conversations are challenging with folks, because they don't understand language. And a lot of times we feel like we have to pretend to understand the language. when we have folks in a conversation that don't understand the finance and accounting language, what happens is they tend to focus on the stuff they're comfortable talking about, which is not always the most strategic or big picture or important stuff, right? This is how we end up talking about staff parking permits and whether we should buy or lease a copier instead of talking about, hey, we've got a funding crisis coming in Washington State. The colleges might expect us to take on more of our overhead costs. Please leave our tiny little pot of money alone for a little bit, because we might need to use it to hire more staff. So essentially, the financial narrative is the story of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. When I started at Seattle Colleges Foundation, it was shortly after I'm gonna look at Tracy. It was shortly after they had done an enormous amount of work merging, was it 3 or 4 separate college foundations? Some. Yeah. And when I came in as a CFO consultant, they had done all the hard work behind the scenes. As far as the financial statements were concerned, it was a done deal, right? We had all our scholarship accounts reconciled, we had all our endowment funds reconciled, but the truth was, the story was much bigger than that. You know, we'd come in, the foundation had come in to take over for some smaller foundations. The colleges were in the same process at Seattle Colleges. So even though on paper our balance sheet looked great, we still were bound to honor the work that had come before. We were bound by our charge to make things more efficient and organized moving forward. We had a very generous Seattle Colleges group that wanted to fund us at a certain level, but we suspected coming up that there were going to be some changes in that. Carrie was relatively new on board, and the foundation was about to launch a fantastic campaign. So if we had just presented our quarterly financial statements out of context of all those things, sometimes the board would hyper-focus on parking permits. This is a literal conversation we had. Instead of focusing on that big picture stuff, which was how do we make sure we have the staff and resources we need to get this big picture stuff done, and knowing that we had to honor all that had come before us too. And that takes time and energy. All right, let's see. All right, so how do we get there? The number one thing that I would say from all my time working as a consultant with nonprofits is make sure that your team knows your story and can talk about it. It doesn't mean everyone has to have a PhD in accounting, right? You literally don't have to have that in order to talk about finance and accounting. But you know, what we were saying about language, we have to translate our financial story into common language as much as we possibly can. Obviously, we can't rewrite the balance sheet structure to say money in, money out, you know, which I'd like to do sometimes. But we can explain to people what the different terms mean and what the big picture context of financial statements is. We can train our staff on some of the basics, like how to read financial statements, how a budget fits into the big picture, why we have audits. If we give folks context and training, it helps build their confidence. And one of the big challenges we have when we're talking to our finance committee and boards is when we feel squirrely about the story we're telling, our board gets worked up, and that's when the conversation kind of goes off the rails, and we don't end up talking about the big picture stuff. And then we have to invest in a lot of Xanax and other relaxing and CBD oils. Yes. And if you don't have someone in-house, accountants are actually really quite good at putting things in common language. Sometimes you have to ask. And if you don't have someone in-house who has the bandwidth to do it, you have other friends at college foundations nearby, or you can always hire consultants. Okay, then the next step is to make your financial reporting accessible to everyone. And that, again, means put stuff in plain language. Make sure you're explaining to your board and your finance committee how you want them to read reports, what you want them to pay attention to. One trick that we use for sure is we always include narrative. We always want to do a little bit of a describer of what we're including there. Little explanatory paragraphs, notes to help a reader understand the context. We're going to show you some of what Nick puts out now. The other thing is it brings me back to like my teaching. I was never a kindergarten teacher, but I wish I was. But like, use color and pictures, like make things pretty and fun to look at. You know this because you're all grade advancement people. Like it helps direct someone's eye to the things you want them to look at. It helps set the mood. You can use colors to say green, everything's fine, yellow, yikes, red, I'm calling in sick today, that kind of stuff. There's nothing more boring than a spreadsheet with 1,000 numbers on it. We cannot compute what that means. And then finally, to use dashboards and KPIs, key performance indicators, to summarize your reporting and to keep it consistent over time. We also want to make sure we're telling the whole story and we're basically telling the same story. So if we pick some key stats and we say at the beginning of the year, this is the most important thing this year, like progress to dollars raised. Well then, second quarter, you can't like eliminate that stat because it's bad news this quarter. You gotta come back and you gotta hold yourself and the team accountable to what you said was important. Besides this just being good practice around transparency and integrity, it also helps build the confidence in the room. It helps your board members trust you more and feel confident. And we have to be able to tell hard truths too. We have to be able to tell that news when it's not great. It's not fun to do that, but it's better to tell it early. And when we start changing, which is so tempting, when we start changing the narrative, what we have to remember is that our board members also think finance is boring, are afraid they're gonna feel dumb at the end of it, are afraid they're gonna miss something. And then, because we've done our great fiduciary oversight training, they also think that if they make a mistake, that the foundation will dissolve and no people will ever get scholarships again. So that's a lot of weight to bring into the room. And it tends to make our board members cranky and paranoid. And so we have to set the context in those conversations, understanding that pressure they bring in. So we gotta tell the good stories and tell the hard stories. All right. So let's talk about dashboards a little bit. A dashboard is really just a summarized report. They should be one page. They should be pretty. They should maybe have some pictures, maybe have some colors. You'll see a couple different examples in a minute. This is one way I like to think about dashboards. This is sort of the way I teach it, which is you don't have to have everything on a dashboard. You should always start with the hook that pulls people in, the why we're all here, right? Which is the program and the impact, the mission piece. So start with, what is it we're doing in the world? How many students got scholarships? How much money went out the door? We'll see a great example of this in a minute. And then because it's a finance dashboard, we have to move into some of the number stuff, but really thinking about that, constructing that story. Okay, why are we doing the stuff we're doing? How are we doing it? And in our case, we raise money and we give out money. Those are the big takeaways. So we want to talk about how we're doing at raising money and the human piece of we are in the people business, right? So you might include things like, if we had a couple big strategic hires this year we had to do, 1 out of 2 key positions hired, that can be a really impactful KPI. It doesn't have to be a boring percentage. And then really hit them with the boring stuff at the bottom, but really important stuff too that folks need to see, which is like where are we on our net assets? Maybe, is our plan performing the way we want it to perform? What is the impact on our cash and our debt? Boards love to know how many months cash you have on hand, that's a good one to include. You can get fancy with some financial ratios, like current and quick ratios, which is just about, how many times over can we pay the bills we've got right now? And then what's the future? So you might have, this is where you might have something about a 5-year capital campaign goal. So this is just one way to think about it, just a suggestion. But really, every dashboard for every organization should be really different from everybody else's, because it should really be a snapshot of what's important to you right now. The other thing I would say about these is definitely get your finance committee or your board in on this project. So you want to try to keep it consistent, but you've got to find that balance so that you're also making tweaks and really meeting people where they are and honoring their requests. So this is the story of the KPIs and dashboard at Seattle Colleges Foundation. We knew we needed something, like we just really wanted something better than we had. And our treasurer had found this article in some obscure journal that had like the 6 most complicated financial metrics nonprofits should measure all the time. And, because you do get some nice, big, fancy people on your boards, right? And sometimes they're having a conversation at a finance level that's not practical. But we gave her what she wanted because she was our board treasurer, and we knew that we would probably take some turns after we gave her what she wanted, but we were like, let's start saying yes. And so I spent, like 3 months trying to figure out how we were gonna measure some of these very complicated things. Made this beautiful, way too big dashboard. I had to have a paragraph explaining every chart because it was so complicated you couldn't tell from looking at it. So the finance committee, they looked at it and we walked them through everything. I think by the second meeting they were like, yeah, we don't understand half of these. And so we just went in there with our big X and we were like, great, yeah, tell us what you don't like. We'll take it out, we'll add new stuff. But some of those KPIs have remained. And what we can report back is like, this was a multi-year project we did in partnership with your predecessors. And this is what we find important. So let's take a look at the Seattle Colleges Foundation stuff.
No judgment.
Yes. Oh, here. We're going to take a look at these 2 reports. One is sort of a summary, and then the other one really has quite a few pictures on it. It's quite pretty. Do you want to take it away, Nick?
I did not write notes, so I did that once at a conference, looked down to read, got lost, totally bombed it. So I didn't do that this time. But I do want to talk about the dashboard that you're looking at up here. We do a 5-year rolling, sorry, not a 5-year, that's why I should have wrote notes. A 5-quarter rolling, trailing dashboard. And these are items that our finance committee really wanted to see so they could be tracking so that they could make strategic decisions around money, budgeting, what does the future look like, what's the past looking like, and where are we going? And so we track investment balance or earnings, total assets, which Amy mentioned earlier, very important. We also track our unrestricted so we can see how that's lining up, what are we spending, what are we bringing in. We do track unrestricted cash on hand. As you know, budget woes are loom and doom all across the state, and so this is actually really important to look at to know that you have enough cash on hand. And we have a reserve policy as well, so we're good. Let's see, contributed revenue. So again, like Carrie said, no judgment. It's been a very rough year for everybody. And our revenue is down. I heard yesterday in some of our breakout sessions that that is the narrative with other foundations as well. So we are not alone, and you are not alone. And we also track admin fees, which is part of our unrestricted operating money. And it's very important to track that because we need to know how much we have available to spend on our operating expenses. And I think I'm ready for the next slide. Oh, I have it. Which button?
So I need to get my steps.
Oh, Amy, I miss working with you. Okay, and so then this is a current copy of our current KPIs as of December 31st. We track 4 different things that are important to our committee, and I think the board as well, but most of the finance committee. They want to know that we're within market ratios for expenditures per functional area, and we're there, kind of. We're a little outside. But we do this based on the trailing 4 quarters, so it's each quarter is 4 quarters of prior quarter data. It's very complicated, but the next one that we do is our fundraising ROI, which is probably really important to everybody in this room, because this is what tracks how much does it cost to bring $1 in. And again, do not judge us. We had really good years and then a really rough one. So and we've hired up, so we have more expenses. But this one's really important, especially if your college leadership is looking to ask you for money. They're probably looking at your ROI internally. The newest one that Amy mentioned earlier is really showing our entire board how much money is actually going out the door and supporting the programs and scholarships of the campuses. And so we created this direct support to colleges year over year, including current, actual, and projected. As you can see, we have skyrocketed out of here almost $6 million last year we were able to get to the campus, each campus. We have 3. It's a lift, right? It's hard to do these things when you work in very bureaucratic systems and everybody's kind of siloed, and you need people like me and Amy to come in and get that conversation going, like, you have funds, let's spend them. Mostly because that's what we're supposed to do, right? That's our whole purpose, but also because we're driven by the amount of money that goes out means you can bring more money in. And if you're just sitting on cash and you're not getting that money out the door, it's really hard to tell a funder, oh, we need another $1 million. I mean, everybody needs $1 million. And the last one that we track on, which is probably the most important for our board, it ties to our operating reserve, and we track this quarterly with our unrestricted net assets divided by how much our actual monthly operating expenses would be, and we come out with how much cash we have on hand. If we were to get 0 support and had to self-fund everything, we would last for 1 year and 3 months. Woo! But that one fluctuates because it depends on how much money is coming in. Unrestricted, as you know, unrestricted is the hardest money to bring in. You're probably getting it through investment revenue or admin fees. Yeah.
Can I say a couple things?
Yes, please.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, these are so great. I'm so glad we had these. Hopefully you can see the demonstration here of, like, we've got pictures, yes. There's also a difference to each one of them. Also, there's an explanation for each one. And we keep that on there every quarter because we forget from time to time. And one quarter, one board member is gonna like this one. And then one quarter, every board member is gonna like that one. And so whenever they dip in and dip out, they can remind themselves, what the heck is this supposed to be talking about? Nick also uses the stoplight system, so these are all green right now, which is really cool. So then you've got finance committee members who look at the materials 5 minutes before the meeting, but they have told themselves they're gonna ask 14 questions. So this helps for those who just wanna dip in. They can just see, like, oh, look, everything's green or everything's yellow. That's where all my questions are gonna be. So what's cool about this is that it's honest, it's transparent, it's building good conversation, but it's also really supporting and directing your board members and finance committee members on the path that you want to have this conversation on. So this is what they're going to talk about because this is what you told them was important to talk about. And it can be a really powerful tool for executive directors in order to drive conversations where they want them to go and keep the board members, frankly, out of the conversations we don't really want them in, where they don't add value, they just create more work for us because they want to talk about parking permits. The end. No, that's what I wanted to say. Do you want to say anything else? Because we'd love to open it up to all of you and just hear if you have questions or if you want to share any wins about how you have this conversation with your boards. And Michael, will you tell us if anyone online has a question?
No one yet posed a question.
Great.
We have not.
Thank you. Great presentation. One of the things that we run into is exactly this. We keep changing every time because they like this one, then they like this one, right? The other thing that we have is some people in our board that think they know what they're talking about and they start talking and they don't really know what they're talking about. Using this, right? And I have to say this, men, stop mansplaining. That happens a lot in our board meeting. And so that is caught attention, but I like what you're saying. The one thing I want to ask you about is, I like the summary part too, right? And we're thinking about moving towards that direction where we send out a summary first. You mentioned some things, I'm sure everyone goes through this. We send out the materials. We can tell them no one has read it until 5 minutes before. Then they start jumping in and so forth. So first, how do you get to this? And it sounds like, if I'm hearing this, it changes, right? Every time someone wants something different.
I think that's That's such a great question. Thanks. And thanks for calling out these conversations are partly tough because the other parties in the room who we can't always control. Like, they're going to show up the way they show up. And sometimes they're our biggest funders, right? Like, they're big, important donors, so we got to be careful of those conversations too. This stayed pretty consistent. I think Nick's really had added in this one, but otherwise, this has been about the same metrics for 3 or 4 years. So you do have to put the brake, in the beginning, we let them have a lot of say, right? Let's design this dashboard the way you want it. But we think consistency is important because we're trying to build some reports that have a shelf life longer than your term, right? And I think that's important because it's not going to be your job to do everything, board chair, board treasurer. There's going to have to be people behind you, right? And so we want to keep this consistent so that we don't change the story every time we get a new board member. And they understand that. They do. And so you can push back a little bit on that. Yeah. What other questions? Yeah.
I have a lot of ways.
Well, online, I think, yeah.
So I am wondering, did I hear you say that you present all of this information every time, and that's why, consistently those that want to see it in a pie chart or a graph or whatever? Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Quarterly, right. I mean, if you can get down to quarterly meetings, that's good. Oh, yeah.
All right, if you meet quarterly, do you send this information, or what information do you send out to your board each month then? And do you find your attendance is better meeting quarterly than monthly?
Yeah. Do you want to say, yeah?
Yes, we do quarterly, and I send a full packet. It's typically 100 to 200 pages of information that they definitely are not reading. But we send it the weekend before the meeting, and luckily we do have some pretty sophisticated folks that they're looking at it at like 11 p.m. Friday night and shooting their questions.
Yeah.
Because I heard the gasp about the 100 pages. Let's be clear. we do send out a big packet. However, a lot of it is appendices, like it's the investment report or the audit report or whatever. So we keep the core part of the packet core. The core packet is not 100 pages.
I mean, they have a beautiful packet. It's one of the best packets I've ever seen. And it has a table of contents, so people know what page to go to. And you put the short stuff up front. And when you train your new board members on how to be good board members, you say, oh, on that off chance you only have 5 minutes, read this page. So they can come at least prepared. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Emily from Tacoma Community College. And I have 2 questions. One is, how involved is your treasurer? Because I have them report out for our board meetings. We meet monthly, and they are they don't ask a lot of questions, I'll be honest with you. We do a lot of pre-work, and so by the time we get there, they feel like they are in the know. And my second question is about reconciliation. You mentioned some funds that may stay stagnant, and right now, I'm like going into 2 years now, and there's a lot of funds that have just been 2 to 3 years, almost 5 years, that have not been dispersed. And I'm talking about a lot of money that is sitting there, and I'm going to be meeting with fund managers soon and just be able to let them know what's happening with their funds so they can use them.
Good questions. I'll break this down. Attack the first one. Our treasurer is very involved. Both of them are. We just changed in June, but we probably meet 3 times a week before our finance committee meetings because he really wants to make sure that he's understanding what he's presenting. And then we meet after that meeting before the executive committee, so he's prepared to go into that meeting. And then we meet before the full board, and I'll sit behind him just to kind of be on backup. The second question is a good one. I like to think of our jobs as being creative solution, right? Like, we gotta find creative solutions and lots of problem solving. I guess my approach would be, what kind of fund is it that's sitting stagnant? Is it a grant that had a year associated to it and it's 5 years ago? It's likely the money probably did get spent, it just never got invoiced to you. So that's one way I would look at that, and I would approach that. If it's just current program funds and they're just like holding on to it because they're scared, and a lot of people do, I come across that too. It's just trying to encourage them to spend these dollars when they do have budget crisis, right? Because these are available, they're probably more flexible. Yeah, I would really look at the type of funds that they are sitting on. I'm coming.
I was curious how you utilize the stoplight system, because I've seen it in a lot of different ways, and do you ever fudge it so that it's not all red?
No, never. So, it's how you communicate, right? If you're nervous about it and you're not confident, you can't justify why you put something green that should probably be yellow, they're gonna sniff that right out. And you're probably looking at the fundraising ROI that's green. It probably should be yellow, but it's green for a reason. Because we are bringing money in, and that will go back up. So, but that is a good question. That is a very good question.
So green is like things are going well.
Green is great. Yellow is like we need to start really monitoring this. Like what is contributing to this, not within industry standard or benchmark. Red, I wouldn't take it off because it's like a clear sign that something's going on. But we've not had red, so.
Yeah, when we first started that, yeah.
My recommendation on those is that, like, you should set, they're subjective. Those stoplights are subjective, right? So it's helpful if you set yourself a range when you decide what the metric is. Like, okay, well, if it's this to this percent off, it's gonna be green. This to this is gonna be yellow, this to this is gonna be red. Then you are not having to make the judgment call when you put the color on there. And hard conversations, we associate bad financial performance with bad individual performance. And that's not always the case. So reframing these conversations so that we're asking our board for support as we develop the narrative for how we're going to get them back to green. Yeah, they're all red. Sucks for you, sucks even more for us. Here's what we need from you. Here's how we're going to right the ship. We need you to be patient. Or, you know what, this always happens quarter one. Look at last year. It's going to be better next quarter. Hang with us. And just be ready to answer tough questions sometimes, right? Like, well, if you aren't making any money, why do you keep hiring fundraising people? Board's favorite questions. They're like born with that question in their head, but then you just have to have the story of like, hey, it takes time, it takes a year. Look at the history, look at these other foundations. There's ways to handle those tough conversations. We will probably wrap up after this question. One more question.
All right, I'm Christine from Centralia, and my amazing staff are watching on TV, which means they can't ask a chat question, so I have their question. And you may or may not be able to answer this because everybody invests their funds differently, but we have a pool of money in our investment account that is not endowed. And we are looking at how the gains come off of that account and what do we do with those gains. And right now we're splitting them for different programs. If you do that the same way, can you tell us or make a recommendation to us of what are you doing with those gains?
We just went through this exercise, and I can tell you, if it's gains on current use funds, not endowed funds, those go against your unrestricted earnings, right? And that's what we do, and that's the standard, industry standard. We also had funds in our pooled endowment that grew really nice and large, and we thought, okay, there's kind of a risk here, so we redid our investment spending policy to create a new investment vehicle based on the time horizon or expenditure of these funds. And I talked about that yesterday, so maybe some of your folks were in our breakout session. Yeah.
It's a good reason to have to amend your policies, your spending and investment policies. I mean, one of the challenges I think that we have that's unique is we want extra money that we can decide how it goes. Of course, we want to always put stuff back into the colleges and back to students, but as independent foundations that may have to fund increasingly higher amounts of our overhead, like, we need to keep a little bit of that for ourselves too. And so that, a lot of technical questions can be in front of the big fundamental question, which is always for boards: are you earning too much money and squirreling it away and not spending it on students, right? That's the fear at the heart of a lot of that stuff. So have the conversation, have good policies. You know, I mean, this conversation has been going on so long that I got to come back to a finance committee meeting this year, because Nick and Carrie were like, we gotta reach back into the where we were part of the narrative. Amy, will you come and tell them how we got, you know, and that's it was such a creative solution development, right? To be like, how are we gonna like get the record to stop skipping here? So yeah, really tough stuff. One more question before we go? Are we ready to wrap? You guys get a break next. All right, well, the ketchup is here. So we have a super ketchup-y break, and thank you guys for paying attention to our presentation tonight.